Welcome to the weak point correction video. In this video, you're going to learn about how to identify and correct your weak points. This is going to be only with regards to hypertrophy. It has nothing to do with strength training. So this is only going to be a sort of bodybuilding focused type of video. So let's get right into it. There's going to be timestamps below for all the body parts and all the sections of the video. If you skip around, I won't be too offended. Trust me. In fact, I won't even know about it, so feel free to jump around if you have a specific area that you want to bring up. Now, the first question you have to ask is it actually a weak point? Now, I conducted a poll a few days ago, and about 30% of people had weak arms. They felt that their arms were a weak point, which explains why biceps videos are so absurdly popular, despite them being an extremely overrated muscle, in my opinion. So is it actually a weak point? How do you actually tell if something is a weak point? Well, first of all, if you're not a competitive bodybuilder, it's basically up to you. But it should be in proportion. One way to tell is that you can actually measure the various body parts and see if everything is in proportion. There's actually a really cool tool by Menno. I will link it in the description below, where you can input your forearm measurements, your upper arm measurements, your neck, your chest, your upper legs, and your calves, and it will tell you if it is over or underdeveloped. So here are my results. You can see some areas are overdeveloped, some areas are underdeveloped, and some areas are really just embarrassing at this point. But that's because I don't train calves. For me, I have very little interest in having big calves. I don't even really like the look of having huge calves. So it is a personal thing. And if you feel it's a weak point, I suppose there's no harm in bringing it up, even if on paper it might already be your best body part. Question number 2 would be, are you training it? There have been several times where someone came to me and they said, Geoff, how do I bring up my forearms or my calves or any particular body part? And I just asked them, what are you doing right now? Because it's important for me as a coach to know what they've been doing. And I just sort of got a bunch of mumbling or grumbling and nothing specific. There was no plan of attack. They weren't training it on a frequent or systematic or methodological basis. And they didn't have a clear answer. To me, that's a sign that they weren't really going about things in the right way. So in order to bring up a weak point, you need to train that weak point. Something that doesn't just magically grow, you have to train it. I've actually encountered this. A trainer at my old gym, he actually asked me why I don't have a chest. He just straight up said to me你为什么不锻炼胸? Why don't you train your chest? And now I have a decent chest, not amazing, but it's better than it was before. And I realized I wasn't actually training my chest. When I was doing dips, I would stay very upright and focus on the triceps because that is a strong point for me. When I was doing bench press, I would do everything closer grip because it felt more comfortable and I was basically just as strong because, again, I had strong triceps. I wasn't doing any isolation work. I wasn't doing cable flies or dumbbell flies or any machines or anything like that. So effectively, I just wasn't really training my chest, and therefore it was a weak point. This brings me to question 3. Are you targeting it? If it's a weak point, you need to go out of your way to target it, and compound movements might not be the best way to go about that. I am a big believer in compound movements. But for compound movements, it's like the modern economy. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. For your body, the strong muscles get stronger and the weak muscles get weaker or stay the same. So for example, if you're doing bench press and you are triceps dominant, your triceps will take more of the tension because they are stronger. Because of that, they will get trained more. Because of that, they will get stronger. And it's a vicious cycle where your strong points just get stronger. And if you don't go out of your way, your weak points just will stay weak. This goes with just about any compound movement. Due to the inherent nature of it being a compound movement, it's going to be working multiple muscle groups. And it might not stimulate those all equally. For some people, sure, maybe. But for a lot of people, the fact that you have a weak point means that it's not going to be enough. And a good measuring stick is, when was the last time that body part was sore? If you're oh, damn, it's been months and months, maybe even years since I got a sore chest, well, you're probably not training it adequately. Muscle soreness is not required for growth, but if you've just never been sore in that area over a very long period of time, you are probably not actually training it. And so you need to learn how to recruit that muscle if it's not being effectively engaged during a compound movement. You can do this in one of two ways. First, you can do other compound movements. If you're having trouble getting your quads engaged when you're squatting, perhaps you're using too much hip, too much hamstring, you always get sore like right in the adductor, glute, hamstring region, or maybe even the lower back, which is probably not a good sign, but you're never ever getting sore quads, try front squats. They're going to change the mechanics of the exercise. Try elevating your heels. Try using squat shoes. You have to alter the mechanics of the compound movement. Otherwise, it's just going to be the same old thing. The strong muscles get stronger, the weak stay the same. You can also focus. This is something that most weak point correction videos don't talk about. Focus. You have to focus on the area that you want to target. If you're not focusing on your quads when you're squatting and you are hamstring dominant, hip dominant, you will probably not engage very much quad. So you can swap the movement, just focus on the area that you want to target, realize the anatomy and the function of the muscle that you are trying to target. If you're doing rows and your rows are like this, that is not going to do anything for your lats, okay? Because the lats extend the shoulder. So if you're rowing like this, yeah, that's a lot of lat. This, not so much. This, also not so much. This is bicep, this is rear delt, this is traps. To row for lats, you have to row low. So knowing the anatomy and the function of a muscle group is essential for knowing what you have to do to get it bigger. You will probably also have to do more. More sets just to get in sufficient volume. More reps because higher reps are going to be easier to forge a mind-muscle connection. You could also work out when you're sore. So do a lot of lat work one day. The next day, come back in and try to target your lats again. You might actually find that it's easier to do lat work when you are still sore. Same with a lot of muscle groups. Soreness is not always a reason not to train a muscle group. You're probably going to have to do higher frequency. You're going to have to use more isolation movements on that particular area, and it might just be slower in general. This is expected and normal. If it's a weak point, it's just going to take time and focus and energy. But it is absolutely possible in almost every circumstance. You also might have to take a time where you do less work on your strong points in order to free up some volume to work on your weak points. If chest is always a strong point, maybe lay off the chest work and focus more on arms, on shoulders, on back, on other areas. This goes for basically any body part, but especially if it is one that might steal tension from the area that you want to bring up. So if you have lagging lats, maybe lay off the trap work for a little bit, maybe lay off the bicep work and really focus on engaging the muscle group that you want to bring up with compound movements. So now let's break it down body part by body part, toe to head, calves, hamstrings, quads, glutes, traps, lats, shoulders, chest, biceps, triceps, and forearms. So body part by body part, I'm going to give you some suggestions with what to do in terms of isolation movements, in terms of what I've seen people respond best to on average. But keep in mind, this is very general and advice, and I don't actually know you, and therefore your results may vary. So let's start with calves. Now, I'm the worst person to ask about this because I truly just genuinely don't care about calves. Give me some bigger delts, give me some Derek delts, but calves, who cares? That being said, I would say realizing a lot of it is genetic, but then also realizing the Achilles tendon is the biggest, the thickest, and the strongest tendon in the body. It is built to be very durable because if you have an Achilles issue and you're out hunting with the clan, well, you're fucked. Okay, it's that important. So it is built to store and release energy. And if you have relatively long Achilles tendons and a relatively small calf, a little sort of basketball player, little nugget calf at the top, you will probably always have relatively small calves. Okay, you can't change that. But you're probably relatively fast and you can probably jump really high, so it's not all bad. One thing you have to do is try to take the tendon out of the movement. So if you're doing a lot of bouncing reps and you have a relatively advantageous Achilles tendon, your body is very, very happy to use the Achilles tendon because it's free real estate. It doesn't take any energy to contract. You're just kangarooing the movement. Okay, so slow things down, pause at the bottom, contract at the top, do a mixture of seated work and standing work. Don't go super heavy because, again, that's going to ruin the movement. It's going to cause bouncing just because you're trying to get the weight up. And really focus on putting the tension into the calf. Next, hamstrings. Now, these are one of the most common lagging areas that I see. I even did a full video on which muscle groups are often lagging, and these were definitely in there. And often people just don't train their hamstrings very effectively. Their leg workout will be like squats, followed by leg press, which is done in a quad-focused manner, followed by short stride lunges, and that's it. Followed by leg extensions, and then you go home, okay? So that is barely doing anything for the hamstrings. And if you want to bring them up, you need to focus more on posterior chain movements. Deadlifts are a good start, but for some people, that tends to be more of an erector or glute-focused movement. So I would say focusing on emphasizing the hamstrings with back extensions, and then with Romanian deadlifts or stiff-legged deadlifts is going to be the way to go. Romanian deadlifts in particular are going to be great because this is where you can really focus on sitting back, keeping a tight lower back, and putting all of that tension, or at least most of that tension, into the hamstring. You're going to have to lighten the weight a ton, but you're going to get a lot more hamstring development. That, and then throwing in some isolation work like leg curls, is going to be a surefire way to grow. I would say more than any other muscle group on this list, the hamstrings are the one area where it's possible, or at least plausible, that you've been overdoing it. If you've been doing a bunch of sets of Romanian deadlifts, back extensions, good mornings, and you're just not seeing results, you might actually see better results with less. That is not the case for most muscles in this video, but for hamstrings, it's possible, just because they are very susceptible to mechanical stress and damage. Plus, they are often more fast twitch and thus just tend to take longer to recover. So for hamstrings, it's possible that you've been doing too much. Not likely, but it could be the case. For quads, the most common reason I see for lagging quads, besides just being weak, is doing squats in an incorrect way for quad growth. If you're squatting like a powerlifter, you're sitting the hips way back, the knees aren't going forward at all, your torso is inclining, you're doing basically a low bar squat in a powerlifting type of manner, well, that's not going to be great for the quads. You might see some growth, but it's definitely not going to maximize growth. Squat in a more Platz-like style. I did a whole video on this. Definitely check it out above. But in order to get bigger quads, you might need to squat in a way that limits the amount of weight that you use. And that's fine, as long as you take the ego out of the equation. For glutes, often it is a mind-muscle connection issue. So I would say do a back extension and really squeeze the glutes at the top. Hold it for a few seconds, really focus on pushing your hips into the pad and squeezing as hard as you can at the top of the movement. If you have really tight hip flexors, this is going to limit your mind-muscle connection with the glutes. Absolutely. I've encountered this quite a bit where I just get tight hip flexors and I can't even really get a complete glute contraction. Hip thrusts and glute bridges can also help a ton where you're really focusing on squeezing at the top of the movement. Don't go too heavy. I would say keep it to like the 10, 15, even 20 rep range and really focus on a quality contraction. If you can get to the point where you get a truly massive butt pump, then you can actually get better results. You're getting a lot of blood in there. You are really blowing that area up. I also think some kind of stretching work like a Bulgarian split squat or a lunge can be invaluable, but make sure you're using a fairly long stride so that it's more glutes than quads. If you're using a short stride and you're just sort of rebounding off of the knee and it's a very quad dominant movement, you won't really see a lot of glute growth. But if you're using a longer stride, you're going deep, you're getting that full stretch in the bottom position, that can be incredibly valuable. Also, I would do some glute medius work. This is definitely an area that can be underdeveloped in a lot of people, and it's important for stability and injury prevention as well. So single leg work is going to help this a lot as well. Plus doing the abduction machine and then something like a clamshell or a side plank with a leg raise can help too. Next up, we have lats. Now, I can absolutely relate to this because this is probably my single greatest lagging body part. I mean, they're okay, but compared to other body parts, they are definitely something that needs to be brought up. I would say focus on the mechanics of the lats. So it's mainly responsible for shoulder extension. So bringing the arm from above down alongside the torso. However, if you're doing pull-ups, it's possible to recruit other areas. Okay, you can, for me, I get a lot of forearms, surprisingly, and a lot of biceps when I do pull-ups or pull-downs. I really have to focus on bringing the elbows out in front and not engaging the biceps, but just bringing the elbow down in front and not focusing on gripping too hard. Perhaps straps can help, Versa grips, etc. But you really want to focus on the function of the lat. Dumbbell pullovers can help a lot because the biceps is not involved at all. If anything, it's more triceps, which are also a strong muscle group for me. So for me, it's like I have relatively strong biceps and strong triceps, so I really have to focus on the lat when I'm training. You can also do cable pullovers. These are fantastic. Again, they're going to be a little bit of triceps, but if you focus really on the lat and contracting the back and stretching the back each rep, these can be absolutely invaluable. You can also change the way that you do pull downs. Instead of being fairly vertical and pulling straight down, for me, again, I find this is a lot of biceps. What I have done recently is lowered the weight by 40% less or so, and then I lean back a little bit and I focus on, again, bringing the weight down in front. Gets you a better contraction, and even though the weight is less, it's going to get a lot more lat activation, which is actually what it's all about. I've also found that doing rows in a particular manner, I touched on this a little bit before, but basically rowing low rather than rowing high or flaring the elbows or focusing on the forearm or the biceps. Really rowing low towards the belly and then keeping chest up and contracting at the end. That is really the only way for me to get any kind of lat activation when I am doing rows. And I also prefer to do this with chest supported variations, machines, or cables, just because if I'm doing a barbell row, there's just too much for me to focus on, and it ends up being traps instead of lats, as well as spinal erector. Next up, we have traps themselves, and this is a very, very common area that I see, especially the lower and mid traps. You'll see someone with a relatively wide back, a pretty good V-taper, but there's very little meat in between the scapula.
Why can't we have some meat? What about them? They're fresh.
Flight meat back on the menu, boys.
So even if they're lean, you won't really see much in terms of, mid traps, lower traps. Often this is a lot of vertical pulling. So they're doing a lot of pull-ups. They're really good at pull-ups, chin-ups, pull-downs, etc. But they're not doing a lot of rowing. And when they do row, they do it the way I do them, targeting the lats. They don't actually focus on scapular retraction. Also, sometimes they are very robotic when they are doing rows, and they are not actually protracting and retracting the scapula. They're just focusing on arm movement, which isn't really going to fully work the full traps. So you have to protract and retract, protract and retract. You might even be able to do this without moving your arm. Really just focusing on this movement in, a bent over row or a cable row, that kind of thing. And being able to feel that can be very, very helpful. Plus, I would say some isolation work like rear delt raises, but focusing more on protraction and retraction can help a lot. Face pulls are invaluable, and perhaps shrugs as well, but where you're bent forward a little bit and you are focusing not just on the upper trap, but on sort of squeezing back with the scapula and working the mid trap region as well. If someone has a lagging chest, often it could be a few things. First, they could just be a relatively high body fat percentage. If you store fat on your chest, and let's say you're 20% body fat, you might not be happy with how your chest looks, even if underneath that fat it is sufficiently developed. You just can't really see all the striations and other stuff, okay? So it might not actually be a weak point, you're just too high of a body fat percentage to actually see the development. That being said, if you do have a chest weak point, often it is programming. I touched on this before with my own mistakes. If you're doing everything with a close grip and you are naturally arm dominant, like I am, you just won't get very much chest stimulation. You're going to want to take a wider grip when you are benching. You're going to want to pause all of your reps. This is something I've been guilty of in the past, where I am bouncing the bar just because chest was a weak point. Therefore, when I was forced to pause my reps, it took a ton of weight off because the chest is most stressed in that bottom position. And so bouncing the bar allowed me to get more reps or to use more weight. Whereas if I took a step back and took the ego out of it, I would realize pausing the bar is actually the best possible option. Also, adding in isolation work can help a ton. So could be dumbbell flies, could be cables. Cables are generally going to be better than dumbbell flies. You just have more freedom of movement. You can take a dumbbell, you can do a cross-body front raise. This is something that I really, really like, and I find I get a lot of value from, where you're just focusing on contracting this upper chest, this shelf right here. And this is an area that is often a weak point, but might not be targeted with bench press or any other compound movement. Reverse grip bench press is also another good option, because if you're taking the elbow like this, it is shifting tension to this upper chest. You can see it here. When you go like this and you're benching in this position, it's much more upper chest and it's much more chest in general. Whereas a lot of people, if they bench with a normal grip, they find it's a lot of shoulder. Moving on to shoulders. Now, front delts are very rarely lagging. They get sufficient stimulus just from the compound movements. Overhead work, from horizontal work, just bench pressing, etc. So they are very, very rarely lagging, and often they are actually overdeveloped. On the other hand, the side delt and the rear delts are often very, very lagging for a lot of people, to the point where I was very, very surprised to see only 15% of people say shoulders and 29% said arms. Y'all are some liars. Jeffrey Verity Schofield calls out his fans. Sub count drops to 0. So the side delt is almost always undertrained. It's one of the most undertrained muscle groups that I've seen, just because it's a small chunk of tissue. It's not exposed to very much mechanical stress, and the strength curve is such that it's only really difficult here. This is easy, this is nothing, and this is the only difficult part of the range of motion. Therefore, you can and should do multiple sets to failure, and you should probably make failure the norm on your lateral raises. Anytime I do a set of lateral raises, I go past failure. Every single time, okay? It's just not a group that really is going to be overtrained, and I think most people undertrain it. Furthermore, I did a video on lateral raise technique itself. A lot of people are not actually targeting the side delt. They're targeting the traps if they're shrugging up a lot, or they're leaning back, externally rotating, and focusing more on the front delt. Whatever is on top is going to be worked. So if you're externally rotated, you're going to be working almost all front delt. Okay, so you're going to want to lean forward a little bit and focus on pushing out. Okay, that is going to be what actually works the side delt. For the rear delt, again, these are often undertrained. Attack those bad boys. Pull-ups, rows probably are not enough. You're going to want isolation movements, rear delt raises. You can do them prone, lying down on a bench. You can do them seated and leaning forward. You can do them standing and hinged forward. Just make sure you're braced. Those are all going to be great. And make sure you are focused on the rear delt. So you're not doing like scapula bullshit. You're actually protracting your scapula, letting your scapula drift forward, and then focus on contracting the rear delts. So you're not like this kind of bullshit, you're actually contracting the area that you want to target. Not the traps, but the rear delts. Skiers are also really, really good. This is where you're leaned forward, but you're not pushing out to the side. You're basically pushing straight back and really focusing on that rear delt and contracting. Again, you're not shrugging up, you're keeping the shoulders down and contracting that rear delt. These are going to be absolutely fantastic for rear delts, and this is probably going to be the best and fastest way to bring those up. Moving on to biceps. Now, these are often overrated, they are often overdeveloped, and therefore, out of principle, I'm going to skip over these and just go right to triceps. So, triceps, I find that the biggest training mistake is not using sufficient range of motion on the isolation movements. You'll see people do push downs and they're like doing half reps. They're not getting a full stretch. They're not getting a nice, juicy, succulent contraction. They're just doing these sort of like flailing partials. No, okay, that is not going to be what actually develops your triceps. You can cheat a little bit, you can use a little bit of momentum, but you do need to be getting that full stretch and that full contraction. Otherwise, you're basically wasting your time. I also find that overhead work is going to be absolutely crucial. If you're not doing any overhead work for your triceps, you are almost certainly leaving long head results on the table. And that is going to be the biggest area. Therefore, it's going to be the most important for size. Okay, fine. Biceps. Actually, what I've found is that most people do too many exercises for their biceps, and they are not actually progressively overloading. Due to this sort of maximalist mindset where they need to do every single exercise, they need to try every single exercise, they don't actually progress in their training because they are constantly switching. So I've seen people who, their list of biceps exercises when they send me their feedback form is like 15 or 20 exercises that they are doing on a regular basis. And then I ask, like, so are you progressing? Like, how much load have you added on these? And they're like, oh yeah, I don't actually track them just because it's too much to actually keep track of. No, okay? Choose 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 biceps movements that agree with you and you can feel and they are good, and get stronger at those. That is going to be what actually grows your biceps, not another variation every single week because you connect with that movement. No, okay? That is a bullshit way of training. As always, my book has a ton of different variations that can help you crush your weak points, whether it's curls or any other movement pattern. It has hundreds of different variations which can absolutely help you. It's on sale for $15 right now, which is honestly a pretty crazy price. It will go up in the future, but right now it is still $15. I would say you're going to want 3 different types of curls. 1, a main overloading movement, so a standard barbell curl, perhaps slightly cheated, easy bar, straight bar, all good. Next, you're going to want a more isolated movement that you can really feel, get a stretch, a contraction. Could be a preacher curl, just something where you can't really cheat on. Spider curls are also really, really good for that. And then finally, you're going to want a more of a brachialis focused movement. So reverse grip, hammer curls, that kind of thing, where it's not just the biceps, but working on sort of that thickness as well. Next up, we have forearms. I would say it's much more likely that you have lagging forearms compared to upper arms, just because a lot of people, they only use straps in their training, they only use machines, they're not actually developing the forearms through compound movements. If you can do rows with, body weight and a half without letting go of the bar, you're probably going to have some decent forearms, okay? Also, some specific work can help, whether it is wrist curls or wrist extensions, those can be good as well. Plus, just reverse grip curls can definitely develop this area. And just be consistent. Don't do anything gimmicky. Mostly it's just the basic movements plus a little bit of isolation. That is going to be what actually develops your forearms, not some weird newfangled exercise. Next up, we have the neck. This is very, very commonly lagging as well. I think more people need to do specific work for their neck. But again, compound movements can work as well. If you're doing shrugs, don't just elevate your scapula, don't just shrug up, but also get your neck involved. I know it looks ridiculous, but you can actually get a pretty wicked contraction from the back of the neck. The traps connect to the neck. So also manipulating your neck can also give you better trap gains as well. I do think specific work can help. So doing like some kind of flexion exercise, I actually put a water bottle on my head, then a plate, and then do like specific flexion work. Some platysma work can also help as well. I did a full video sort of on that up there as well. And this can be an area that responds very, very quickly. You would be surprised at how much visible size you can put on your neck in just a few weeks if you train it correctly, diligently, with enough volume and frequency. I wouldn't go super heavy. This isn't like a 1 rep max kind of thing. That would be stupid. But I would say, get in enough volume and frequency and just let that take care of the work rather than choosing heavy ass weights. Next up, we have abs, or the midsection. Now, most people actually have too much mass in this area. It's just not muscle, okay? So fat loss is going to be key, and I see so many people marketing abdominal exercises when it just doesn't matter for 99% of the population. I would say 99 to 99.5% of people, it doesn't really matter, okay? You should get lean first. It's not that ab work can't actually develop this area. It can, you just won't really be able to see the difference very easily. And therefore, it's kind of a waste of time. That being said, I don't think compound movements are enough. You see some coaches who just say, do squats, do deadlifts, that's it. Do overhead press. Well, that's going to work your transverse abdominis because you are forced to brace. Even if you're curling, that is going to be a great transverse abdominis exercise. But, the serratus, the obliques, the rectus abdominis, those are not going to be trained all that well from compound movements. So I think, planks, plank variations that are more difficult, cable crunches, Bosu ball crunches, all that good shit where you're actually contracting that area can be very, very good. However, make sure you're not just doing a million fucking reps per day and you're actually progressively overloading. One mistake that I see all the time is people do super high reps thinking that the abs should be trained way differently than some other muscle group. I do think slightly higher reps is a good idea just because it is working the spine and it makes a little more sense to use higher reps. But, if you're doing sets of 40 to 50 only for abs, not a good idea. And I do think this is one area that can make a big difference in your physique if you are sufficiently lean. If you're not 15% body fat, doesn't matter. And as you get closer to 10% body fat, it makes more of a difference. For me, I don't have impressive abdominals, even if I am lean, because I don't really train this area, because I hate this type of training, therefore I don't do it. All right, I think that just about covers it. Let me know if there's some other weak point, a lagging body part for you that I didn't cover in this video. Apart from that one, I'm not a magician. So make sure to like the video if you like the video. Subscribe to the channel if you are not already. Slap around that notification button if you want to decide what you watch rather than the YouTube algorithm telling you what to watch. And I will see you in the next video. Peace.